If you were not aware, there was just a message, and this meeting will be recorded and will be available at a later date for others to engage in the conversation and the information as well. So without further delay, good evening and welcome to the DC Tax Revision Commission conversation for the evening. We are going to be utilizing a Menti poll throughout the conversation to gather some quantitative data from you and to ask some questions. And so as we do that, we'll ask that you look in the far left corner and go to menti.com with your device and log in. You can use the QR code, or you can go to menti.com and utilize the code that's on the screen to enter so that you can answer the questions that will come up in the meeting. Without further ado, let's go to the next slide and get our conversation started this evening. Conversation today is the DC Tax Revision Commission, and it's your district, your taxes. And this is a presentation to the Advisory Neighborhood Commissioners, and we are happy to have you here. Next slide. And so to get us started and get adjusted to the Menti poll, if you're unfamiliar, we have a little icebreaker question for you this afternoon, or this evening rather. What do you like best about DC in the springtime? And so as you go to menti.com or use the QR code, our word cloud will appear on the screen to tell us what people like best about DC in the springtime. Sunshine, walking, cherry blossoms. No mosquitoes yet. Yeah, that's an excellent one there. Blooming plants. Yeah. We've had a beautiful last couple of weeks. And so springtime has jumped out at us, and we've had a great season. And this season, which is beautiful outside, we hope that it will continue to be a beautiful and blossoming season for the city. Tennis, weather, cherry blossom, blooming plants. So the beautiful thing that we're glad about is that we know that most of you have now understood how to use the Menti poll. And we'll be asking some questions that are pertaining to the DC tax system throughout the presentation. And so you utilize the poll in the exact same way that you have done here at the entree of our conversation. So let's go to our next slide. So our agenda for today is as follows. We'll have a welcome. We'll talk about what the purpose of this meeting is. We'll give a brief presentation on the background of why taxes are important to Washington, D.C. And we'll talk about the DC Tax Revision Commission, what its role is and the legislation that allows it to be. And then we'll get into some discussion, which is the most important aspect of this meeting, so we can directly hear from you, the people who have a heartbeat of the citizenry, about what may be important to them as far as revisions or recommendations or improvements to our existing tax system. And lastly, we'll close out with what the next steps of the Tax Revision Commission are for this season. Next slide. And so it's Mayor Williams, the Honorable Anthony Williams, our former mayor of Washington, D.C. from 1998 through 2006, is the chair of the Tax Revision Commission. And I am seeing if he is online today to provide a welcome. If not, we will proceed. He may have been caught up in a meeting. And so the welcome for this evening is to go into our purpose. Thank you again for coming. But the purpose of this discussion is to provide area neighborhood commissioners with an opportunity to provide your thoughts and your feedback on the DC tax system that is before the DC Tax Revision Commission TRC, that's how we will just explain it for the rest of the presentation for your review. The TRC will hear and consider the viewpoints of you, the ANC commissioners, as well as the public at large, as it recommends changes to the DC Council and to the mayor for the DC tax system. Next slide. So we'll go through quickly a couple of participation norms so that we're very ease into this conversation. So you'll use the raise the hand button via Zoom if you have a question or if you would like to speak. We have someone also monitoring the chat, and so that you can put your questions in the chat and we will get to those questions as soon as possible or throughout the presentation. We'll offer time for that. Please limit your questions or your statements when you do have the opportunity to speak to 1 minute, because we want everyone who is here today to have the ability to participate in the conversation. You may also contribute your thoughts now or later by uploading them to the DC Tax Revision Commission.org website, and we will have a QR code at the end of the presentation that you can just put your phone up to and click on it and go right to the website and be able to leave your comments and commentary there. And so we have multitude of ways for you to engage in this conversation, and so we'll continue forward. Next slide. So quickly again, so we can understand who we have on the conversation tonight and what wards are represented. If you don't mind going back to that Menti poll and giving us some information on what ward you represent, even if you're either an ANC commissioner or if you're someone from the public joining tonight, we'd like to know who we have participating. So right now, yeah, we have participation from the first 5 wards in the city. 2 from Ward 5 and 2 from Ward 2, several members from Wards 1, 3, and 4, and a little less participation from 6, 7, and 8. We appreciate this information because it also will help us how we can put together additional presentations going forward and what specific sectors of the city we may want to engage to get their feedback and information. So we appreciate that. And now we will go to why taxes, and Nicholas will come on and give us a presentation on why taxes are important and give us some background on that for us today. So Nick.
Great, thanks so much, Ray. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. So Mr. Johnson, thank you. Take it away.
So great to be with everybody today on this. It's a lovely evening out there. So I appreciate people coming inside and getting on their computers. I'm going to start with a little bit of a tangent to help explain some of the reasons why I think tax policy is super important. I'm going to start by talking about one of my favorite places to be in the springtime in Washington, D.C., which is this really beautiful bridge not far from where I live. It's the new Frederick Douglass Bridge. You know, and you think about bridges, right? Our country has a little bit of a bad habit of taking our bridges for granted. Too often we build them ugly and then we let them crumble, but we know bridges are critical infrastructure and we take them for granted at our peril. If we're going to function as a community, though, we need our bridges to be safe and functional and really serve everyone in our community. And this bridge, I think, it's got 6 smooth lanes of traffic, or 77,000 vehicles a day. It's got beautiful bike and pedestrian lanes, and it connects 2 parts of the city that we all know need stronger connections. Planning this bridge took a lot of time and care, and it involved the whole community. And of course, it's named for Frederick Douglass, and so it reminds us of our shared heritage as DC residents. So obviously this is a metaphor, like a lot of our bridges. If you've ever been stuck on a crumbling bridge, taxes also can be frustrating, sometimes scary, sometimes ugly, sometimes harmful. And this time of year, a lot of people find them to be extra painful, but we're better off, as with our bridges, if we don't just close our eyes and pretend they're not there, or if we let someone else design something for us that serves their interests instead of ours. A better designed tax system, like a better designed bridge, can help this city thrive. The tax system is something we have in common, and it connects us. So one of the key ways, probably maybe the most important way that the tax system helps the city thrive is it pays for services. So just as a reminder, I think as veterans of DC, you all probably have a sense of this, but this is where our local taxes and other locally raised revenues go. 27% of it goes for our education system writ large, so our schools and our parks and our libraries. 22% of it goes to health, human services. 24% of it goes to infrastructure and financing and operating that infrastructure, roads and so on, and bridges. 12% of it goes to public safety, police, EMS, fire. And then 15% of these our local funds go to pay for sort of general government, economic development, regulation, and so on. So all pieces of what helps our city thrive. And so I'm going to spend a little time talking about these taxes. And I think I just want to make sure we're able to ground everybody in the very basics. So apologies to those of you for whom this is old news. In DC, we pay our taxes both to the federal government and to DC government. It's nice and simple. And I say that partly for anyone who's lived somewhere else, elsewhere, you might pay taxes to the state, you might pay taxes to the city you live, maybe the school district, the township, other units of government. Here it's a little more straightforward. We've just got the federal government and the DC government, but the DC government does levy a number of different types of taxes. You've got property taxes, which are, as most of you know, levied on the value of the real property, the buildings, and land, homes, office buildings, and it's a straight percentage of the value of that property. We in the district rely on income taxes. Now, and when I say income taxes, I'm talking about both individual income taxes, right? The taxes we pay on our wages and our salaries, investment income, if you have that, sometimes some portion of retirement income, other kinds of income. But it's also, income taxes can also refer to business income taxes, corporate income taxes, taxes on certain unincorporated businesses' incomes. We pay sales tax. We have a 6% sales tax on a lot of goods and services that we buy, and we've got other kinds of sales taxes too: cigarette taxes, alcohol taxes, and then we've got a range of other sort of smaller revenue sources, fees that we may pay for public services, fines for things like traffic violations, lottery revenues, and so on. So these all together make up our revenue stream. That's a quick overview of what we're talking about today, because I want to make sure to establish the level set, the universe of things we're talking about. It's, most economists look at our tax system and they think it's a pretty well-rounded system. These are all the sort of typical major types of state and local revenues that people around the country are used to paying. But we face some challenges, and at the Tax Revision Commission, we've been hearing about some of the challenges that we face in our tax system, and I'll share a little bit about a few of them. One is changes in the economy, and over the last few years, with the pandemic and changes in where people are working, our economy has changed, and that's changed revenues. One big way is that very recently we had a downward revision in the revenue estimates, the estimates of how much revenue is going to be coming into the government. And that results in big part from the fact that people aren't coming into offices as much. So the value of some of those big office buildings downtown has gone down. And because property tax is levied as a percentage of the value of the buildings, property tax revenue is projected to be going down. So we've got some bumpy times, potentially more bumpy times ahead as the economy sort of sorts out. And DC is not unique in this regard at all. Sales taxes took a big hit during the recession when people weren't going out, weren't spending money. They've largely come back, but we don't know what the future really lies for that. Our income taxes are doing well, as particularly because a lot of people have done pretty well economically. A lot of corporations have done pretty well economically. Taxes from wealthy individuals and from corporations has actually gone up How long is that going to last? We're not sure. So some challenges ahead on the revenue front, and of course that could affect the ability to pay for the services I mentioned ago. You know, other challenges, some of our taxes hit pretty hard at people with the least ability to pay. You know, sales tax, you got to pay sales tax on an item of clothing, whether you feel like you can afford that or not. Property taxes hit some property owners pretty hard. We've got a range of tax breaks throughout the tax code that need some examination. The Office of Chief Financial Office, the CFO's office publishes a big directory with lots and lots of these tax breaks. A lot of people don't know about things. And so they end up only benefiting a few and not getting necessarily the scrutiny that they deserve. We've got the perennial problem that the folks who come in and work in the district and then go home, even if their employment is essentially using DC services, they're not paying tax on the income that they're earning here. We've got economic competitors just over our borders in Maryland and Virginia. And, you know, this time of year, I don't think I have to share with folks that we've got a complicated tax system. And a lot of times it seems just too complicated, maybe more complicated and difficult to deal with than it needs to be. So those are some of the challenges that we've been hearing about on the commission. I want to pause and let you all reflect back what you're feeling and seeing in terms of the challenges. And we'll do another one of these Menti polls. Oh, this is just a graph showing the some of the tax revenue challenges, and I'll just flag the downward, the orange line and the yellow line that are tapping downwards a little bit. The property taxes, you know, if that continues, that's going to be an ongoing challenge for the district. But let me open it up to you all and go back to that Mentimeter slide if you would, and just type in something you're seeing. We'll have a chance to talk about this further, but I'm interested, top of mind for you, what's jumping out at you? What's feeling like a challenge? And I say challenges or opportunities because, of course, every challenge is itself an opportunity to turn things around. So where do you see the challenges or the opportunities to make things better in DC in terms of the tax system?
Nick, and while we are waiting for responses to the Menti poll, we have a question in the chat. And I think if Yesham wouldn't mind respond to that question, but I'll ask the question out loud, and then we'll allow Yesham to respond to it. And the question is from Paula Edwards, and the question is, what is the current DC income tax non-compliance rate? And so, Yesham, if you would not mind taking that question, it would be great for us. Thank you.
Hi, Paula, thank you so much for your question. One of the advantages we have here in the District of Columbia, like many other states, we define income, taxable income, exactly the same way as the federal government defines it. So that we have a few little things where we kind of decouple from, but most of the way we define income is exactly the same as the federal government does it. So we benefit a lot from the federal government's audit powers. If the feds ding somebody for not reporting their income correctly, automatically whatever additional revenue the feds collect from that individual, we are also able to go back and tax them at our own tax rates and capture that. So our income tax compliance rate is pretty strong.
Thank you so much, Yesham, for that answer. And we, again, are recording this. And so this information will be available post the meeting. Nick, if you want to get back to the challenges or opportunities, we'll pass the mic back to you.
Thank you all for sharing these thoughts. And like I said, we'll have a chance to come back to this in a moment. So facing these challenges, the council has established the Tax Revision Commission. This is the chunk of the code the DC code that is actually establishes the Tax Revision Commission in law. The code says we're supposed to convene every 10 years. And so 10 years, there was a Tax Revision Commission in 2012, 2014 that I'll come back to in a few moments, but this is the code, and you can see some of the challenges that I mentioned a moment ago show up here in the charge from the DC Council. And this is the folks that are on it. You all just met Yesham. She's one of our commission members, a veteran of the CFO's office, now executive director of the DC Policy Center. We've got a few other commission members on the phone, and let me pause and let them give a shout out, because in the course of shouting out, we'll be able to see their bright, shiny faces. I'm pretty sure Erica's on the line. Do you have, are you able to say hello?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm off camera because I'm juggling dinner and kids, but glad to be here and to hear from all of you.
Erica Williams is executive director of the DC Policy Center. I think Gregory's on the line.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gregory McCarthy. I live in Ward 2. I've been a district resident for actually over 40 years now. I'm enjoying our work on the commission, and I'm very grateful for your service as commissioners and very eager to hear your input tonight.
And I'll let a couple of our staff members also introduce themselves and put them on the spot a little bit, if you don't mind. We have a small but ferocious staff. Mike Hegeman is on the line. You want to say hi? Come on camera and say hello.
Yeah, my name is Mike Hegeman. I'm the Senior Research Associate with the DC Tax Revision Commission.
And Becky Strauss is manning the Zoom.
Yeah, I am helping Nick and Mike, but my full-time job is at the Federal City Council, and I am also an ANC commissioner for 2CO2. Enjoying the conversation.
And we're drawing a lot. Thanks, Becky. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everybody. Any other commissioners on the line that I missed? I'm not seeing any. Okay. Thank you guys for joining us. And I know we're in the middle of a spate of public engagement activities, so we're all stretched a little thin, but I know folks are really eager to join on. The key thing here is we're on a short timeline. Our recommendations are due to the council and the mayor by the end of 2023. So we have our work cut out for us. So your input tonight and ongoing will be really helpful. The commission has adopted a set of principles, and again, these will look similar from that slide about the challenges, from the slide about the charge from the council. But I want you to look at these charges and think about them. These are the goals that we've established, our big picture sort of moonshot goals: broader, more resilient tax base to deal with this post-COVID economy we're heading into. Really a need for a strong, progressive, and racial equity in the tax code to make sure that we're treating the residents of the district fairly, economic efficiency and competitiveness to make sure we have an economy that's really working for our residents, and simple and open and fair administrative processes, again, in how we deal with the tax system. So those are our big principles. And we've also adopted 3 sort of guidelines for our strategies, how we're approaching. And number 1 is we're following the data. So we are really trying to pay attention to the research, to the information. We are not a body. We do a former mayor as our chair, but principally this is not a body of elected officials. This is a body of people who are sincerely trying to look at what the information is in front of us and make some recommendations to the mayor and the council for where to go. The second key strategy is what we're doing right now, engaging with people across the district. And we'll talk more about how we can do that and do that better. And then the third is we are trying to work together collaboratively. We have a pretty diverse array of perspectives on the commission, and our goal is really to listen to each other, follow the evidence, listen to people across the district, and try to come up with a set of recommendations that we can together forward to the council and to the mayor. So, we've got here's another one of these Menti bowls. We've got these 4 principles. We think they're all important, right? If I had 4 children, I would not be telling you which one is most important, but I'm going to give you all a chance to say, hey, what jumps out at you? And this is a chance for you to rank these 4, and then the rankings. This is of course, totally unscientific. And I'm curious what is jumping out at you as you all see this. All right, I think we've got a good sense of folks. Feel free to, if anyone's online and wants to continue the voting. Obviously, a lot of folks are interested in the economy and competitiveness, strong interest in a broader and more resilient tax base, as well as progressivity and racial equity and simple and open, fair administrative processes. So thank you all. And these are our, I think part of our conversation can continue to be about, hey, what do we see as most important here? In terms of specific policy ideas, at this point, everything is on the table. We're still in kind of the listening and learning mode of this whole process. If you poke around our website, and we'll share again the link at the end, you'll see a bunch of activities that have come on the table. So I've put a few here that we've been briefed on, not to say that these are particularly favored ideas or in any way decisions have been made, but just to give you examples and something for you to maybe react to and build off of. So one idea is broadening our tax base through what some jurisdictions have called the business activity tax. The idea here is to make sure we're capturing the full range of economic activity in the district, which can potentially help protect us from future economic weakness in any one area. A second idea on the table is looking hard at our property tax relief programs. We've got a number of programs that are aimed at helping residents afford property taxes, which has been as property values, property costs have risen for a lot of people faster than their incomes. Property taxes can potentially hit them. How do we help take the edge off that? We got a bunch of programs, but are they as well designed as they could be? The federal government has a child tax credit. A number of local other places around the country are looking at a child tax credit. It's been incredibly effective at reducing child poverty, helping families make ends meet. That's an idea that's out there. We had a briefing on the issue of racial equity in the tax code. One of our commission meetings back in the fall was focused on that. And we were really reminded about how centuries of unequal treatment of Black folks and white folks has led to a deep racial wealth gap. So an idea that was put forward at that meeting was around targeting taxes to highly concentrated wealth. And thirdly, a number of ideas have come forward about different kinds of tax abatements or tax credits for economic development. Is something that we heard from the mayor's office about her economic plan, and they're interested in ideas about how the tax code can support economic development strategies. Again, every idea, we're looking at the income tax, we're looking at the sales tax, we're looking at property taxes, we're looking at business taxes. Tax cuts, tax increases, a mix. And this has the potential to have a big impact. And I'm showing you the report of the DC Tax Commission from 10 years ago, May 2014. We have at least one member of that commission on the call right now, I believe. And that commission did come together around a set of recommendations that it did forward to the council and mayor. And they made a difference. They led to lower personal income taxes for many low and middle income families. That led to some a lower corporate income tax, as well as some changes to the sales tax to broaden the base of the sales tax, and some changes to alcohol taxes. So a number of important recommendations came out of that tax revision commission 10 years ago that were in the end enacted. And I'm not sure those would have been put on the table had it not been for that commission's work. So first of all, kudos to that commission for its work. But second of all, this is why we're taking this work seriously. Like, we think we have a potential to build on that work, reflect the challenges that have emerged in the last 10 years, and the new ideas that emerged in the last 10 years, and put forward some equally compelling ideas that can get adapted by policymakers. So that ends the presentation. I just want to do a quick advertisement for our website. We've got a lot more research materials and links to research materials on the DC Tax Revision website. And if you have substantive questions, we can tackle them in the course of the discussion or afterwards. But at this time, I'm going to turn it back over to Ray, because now we get to the important part of the evening, which is listening to what the ideas that you all have for us. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Nicholas, and a great presentation. So now is the most important aspect of the meeting, because we want to hear from those who are here on the line. We do have a quick question that I'll jump into right before we get into the discussion ideas, because I want to make sure that we address that which is in the chat. And so we just got a question from Gerald Strauff. I want to say your last name incorrectly. I apologize. But the question is this: what has been the result of efforts to use the tax incentives to promote economic growth in poverty areas? And are there any successes to report? And I think there was two parts to the question. The first part of that was, does Congress have any role in the DC tax system? So I know we have some tax experts on the line tonight. And so either Yesham or Erica, would you like to take that question?
Sure, this is Erica. I can answer the first question, and maybe Yesham, you want to take the second. Congress definitely has a role to play, in the sense that we are limited under home rule from fully taxing the income earned within our borders. So there are a lot of people and a lot of businesses who fully earn their income here in the district, and we're unable to tax that because of federal limitations. So our recent estimate at DCFPI was that we're foregoing about $3 billion in personal income tax collections each year because of that. And that's assuming we would tax income earned by out-of-staters the same we do here. So it does have a big impact. And it's a good reason for statehood.
Thank you so much. Yesham, would you mind taking the second half of that question? And I can repeat
sure.
it if you like.
Add a little bit to what Erica said. So income, we cannot tax commuters, as Erica described. We also have certain property in the District of Columbia we would have taxed had it not been for federal law. For example, there are lots of nonprofits in DC, like the American Heart Association, American Dentist Association, National Geographic. These would not have been eligible for property tax exemptions under DC code because they're not serving directly DC residents. But because of federal legislation, we are not able to tax that. So that's another preemption on our property taxes. And I'm not talking about like buildings owned by the federal government. I'm talking about privately owned entities. In many other cities, embassies are not automatically eligible for tax exemptions for their property. In DC, because of federal law, they are. And then the third type of preemption on the district's taxing abilities, when you think about it, is the HITE Act. All of us really like the HITE Act, but that also means that we really cannot build more to tax more. So that's it. In terms of tax incentives to promote economic growth in poverty areas, this is a question that's, in my mind, I always ask this question as, what are the conditions under which incentives will work and will not work? They do work well when a region is struggling to attract investment. A good example of this is the Verizon Center or the Southwest Waterfront. These are places that didn't exist before the incentives, and they're kind of game changers. But there are other conditions when a city is already growing and there's a lot of demand for being in the city. Tax incentives may not be serving their purpose then. And I think right now for the District of Columbia, the city's attractiveness has kind of waned, and it's something that we need to look at carefully. But I think there's no right or wrong answer. The real question is, what are the conditions under which they will work? What are the conditions under they won't? It's a really important question. So thank you so much, Gerald, for asking it.
Thank you for the question and for the engagement, Yeshim. We have another question in the chat as well, and I will read through it to see if it's more just a statement or a question. It speaks to taxpayers age 65 or older or blind who lose enhanced personal exemption for years. Once DC taxpayers turn 65, they received higher personal exemption when they filed their taxes. Taxpayers who are blind received a higher personal exemption, and starting in 2018, that exemption for seniors and blind taxpayers was no longer available. This penalizes the most vulnerable taxpayers, and it does not support them. And it appears the DC Council has not valued seniors, or that's a thought or perspective that's stated here. So the question that comes in regards to that is, we did get this exclusion, DC discontinued it. Will the Tax Revenue Commission consider bringing back this exemption, as well as other means to lower taxes on retirement income? So I think the question in general is around taxes on retirement income, or is that something that could be put forward as a recommendation? And I'll pose that to the members of the TRC who are present. Any thoughts?
Well, I mean, I'll just say, I think this is exactly the kind of input that we're looking for in this conversation. I think Carla, I think you've articulated well the case for this exemption. So I really appreciate this kind of input. And, you know, as I think we're spreading the word about the work of the commission, this is the sort of recommendations we'd love to see people raise in these kinds of public meetings or via our website. I won't respond to the substance of whether it's something the commission is going to take on, but from a staff perspective, it is the kind of idea that we are going to be putting on the table.
Yeah, and thank you for that response, Nick, as well as this is a brainstorming session to some extent. So to underscore Nick's comment, Carlo, we will be collecting this information and putting it all together for the commission to look at in whole. And so we will take the entirety of your comment into context and make sure that it's received by the commission as a whole to review as a possible recommendation or to think through for response. Looking through the chat to see if there's anything else, but also opening up the floor for questions. Again, please raise your hand if you have a question, or if you feel more comfortable, you can put that question within the chat. But among the ideas that you've heard this evening, what has resonated the most? Was it some of the things that were put forward earlier that are being briefed or that are somewhat on the virtual table at this point? Or there's something that's been agitating you, or actually something your residents or your citizens that you represent have brought up in conversations through ANC meetings or commission discussions that you may want to bring up at this point in time? The floor is open.
Ray, I see somebody has their hand up.
David Rubenstein, go ahead.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. It's very interesting. I'm putting on my ANC hat at the moment, and I think what sets the district apart in terms of its competitive is it's a different kind of, in many parts of the district, it's a different kind of neighborhood than you can get elsewhere in the region. More dense, neighborhood retail, restaurants, stores, walkability, and I think that sets us apart. However, I think over the past couple of years, we put a lot of burden, and I don't think it's necessarily misplaced, but on raising wages, payroll taxes to fund leave. And I worry that in this post-pandemic world, we have a risk of growing vacancies in our commercial corridors, retail, restaurants. Those also happen to be great economic opportunities for many district residents who want to be in those kinds of businesses. But I worry that we've made it too difficult, and that maybe there are things in the tax code that could be looked at to sustain our commercial corridors. And I think we have to say also, that's downtown too at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Rubenstein, for your comment. It will be taken into context as well. We appreciate it. Mr. Joe Bishop, I can't see the last part of your name. Sorry, Henchman. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I know a lot of the testimony, you guys are doing a lot of meetings and I'm very grateful for it. I don't want to be just another person saying we should raise more money to spend on things I care about, and don't get it from me, get it from somebody else. So I'm going to try to provide some ideas that I've heard from other people that may be helpful. And I think all three of them check all four of the boxes of your principles, but we'll see. One of them is the empty storefronts issue. And I think it goes a little bit into what Mr. Rubenstein just said, where, I'm in Ward 5, where we're doing our fair share, maybe more than our fair share, of helping address the city's housing crisis. We have a lot of new construction, a lot of new neighbors, a lot of new tax base, a lot of new businesses. It would be great if we could see that all over the city and greatly simplify our zoning code in order to enable that, and greatly simplify our process. And, I don't know if you would consider that within your remit. I strongly urge you to think about that. But at minimum, what we could do is look at how we blend the property tax on properties, because properties are either residential or they're commercial. So if there's a vacant storefront in a otherwise commercial building, they don't get the vacancy tax applied to them. And maybe we should prorate it or something like that and get some of those businesses filled. Second thing I wanted to raise is, relates to what Ms. Sayin was saying about taxing out of staters. I know that's very difficult, but it seems like every time we have a major traffic accident in this city, they pull the file and it's an out-of-state driver with, 14 unpaid tickets, and they owe tens of thousands of dollars. And right now we don't have reciprocity agreements with Maryland and Virginia to collect that money. And I feel like that should be a big priority. I don't want to call it free money, but it's money that's owed and not being paid by some very reckless people that have taken lives, including in Ward 5. And I don't know whether a congestion tax can be part of that discussion. I know that we, the taxpayers, paid for a study of the congestion tax. It's somewhere in the Wilson building. It hasn't been publicly released yet. I hope at least they'll let you, the commissioners, look at it and pass judgment on it and provide information on whether that's a good idea. And the third thing, and I'll wrap it up very quickly, is the OTR Clean Hands process needs a lot of work. I'm working with a nonprofit right now that they don't have retail sales. They don't pay the franchise tax, but OTR wants all of this paperwork from them, and they can't get their business license because they're having to explain to a different OTR person every time they call that they're a nonprofit and they don't need to do stuff. So they're having to pay $600 to an expediter to get through OTR to get their business license. And that's just one nonprofit. I have to imagine if there's an expediter who has a stated rate, they're doing this for more than just one business. So I'd like to see some strong look at the administrative stuff. We'll also send a separate letter with some other ideas, but I've talked on long enough, so I'll leave it there. Thank you for your hard work on this.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop Henchman. Great comments. Again, they were going to be taken into context. I'm glad we're recording this conversation because you had very thorough comments. And two, if you can, actually go to the website and offer those as well. So they'll be collected in that regard, but we are taking copious notes from this meeting. So we thank you for that. One piece of information that I think potentially one of the members of TRC can engage on is the reciprocity issue. And so Yesham, would you mind having some comments with regards to the reciprocity issue Mr. Henchman brought up?
Yeah. Hey, Joe, thank you so much for the question. So my brain cannot process timelines anymore because of COVID, but we created a collection agency within the CFO maybe about 10 years ago, specifically focusing on the traffic fees and the traffic fines that we cannot collect. And that entity has been trying to sign reciprocity agreements, but there's very little interest from Maryland and Virginia to engage in that. And so this collection agency has been trying to collect these funds. And, when you go to a collection company, they'll offer you like a cent on the dollar or something like this. So it's not that there hasn't been any work put into this. It's just that there has to be will from the surrounding jurisdictions to participate. And that will, unfortunately, is not there.
Thank you, Yesham. We had a question in the chat or a comment that I think is very similar, and I'll go to that, and then Ms. Edwards, we'll get to yours. This is from Edward Borrego. Hope I, again, is pronouncing your name right. Please apologize if not. And the second consideration of reciprocity that is stated here by Edward is traffic tickets, congestion tax, and OTR could also use improvement for small business payments, unincorporated payments, which are required to be mailed in versus being able to be paid online. And so, Edward, would you mind elaborating on your comment a bit more so it can be better understood by all? Are you there, sir?
Oh, yep. Sorry.
Yes, no problem.
So I'm commissioner for 5B01, but we also rent a room in our house. And every year when I go to pay for having an unincorporated sole proprietorship, since we only have to pay the minimum fee, I'm required to mail in a check. I'm not allowed to use OTR's online payment system because we don't owe enough in taxes to pay. So that was just my comment there. It seems kind of weird that OTR would require people who are paying under a certain amount of tax for business purposes to have to mail it in versus just using their online system. So that seems a little backwards.
Thank you for that comment. I think that gets into the administrative issues and the administrative aspects of what the TRC wants to improve. And so we'll take that comment into account as well. Nick, did you have a comment that associated with that?
No, just thank you. And I would say if there's, when we ranked the issues earlier, people obviously see there's big issues facing the tax system, but there's a very consistent threads to what we hear from lots of different sources about the clean hands process. And I think it's really helpful for you all to lift it up because we met with a number of small businesses yesterday and they came up then. So thank you for flagging in. I also see the next another comment in the chat about that as well.
Yeah, and I'll read Ms. Edwards' question or comment to all if they're not able to access the chat. And she states the following: I am concerned with the money that we're leaving on the table. I think that we can use the carrot rather than the stick to improve compliance. Taxation at the source is a large issue, and I wonder how much we work regionally to ensure that fair distribution of taxes to everyone's benefit. The lack of communication between DC agencies is a huge issue because businesses and others have to run back and forth between agencies to get, as we stated and talked about earlier, clean hands and other information that should be readily available. Again, I think this speaks or underscores the issues of administration that the TRC wants to tackle. And so we will catalog it in that area for their review.
Ray, I have a question I'd like to ask other commissioners about the coming speeding cameras. So if you guys aren't aware, it's a big part of the mayor's budget is to raise hundreds of millions of dollars more per year in speeding tickets by installing, Yesham, how many cameras? A huge number. And from my understanding as a commissioner and what I've heard from other commissioners in the past is that they often get complaints about people speeding. And so a lot of people in neighborhoods say, yes, whatever you can do to slow cars down, put in a speed bump, put in a camera. And I wonder, is that really true for what you guys have heard among your community? What do you think about using speeding cameras and tickets to help fund the DC government? Do you think that's fair, or you think it's also just good public policy because your neighborhoods will be safer? Do you think it's unjust? What do you guys think? It is true, the slower cars are, the fewer pedestrians and cyclists get hit. Anybody?
No one wants to touch that, Becky.
Yeah, we haven't gotten anybody in the chat, nor I see a raised hand on that one.
We'll think about it.
We will put it in the parking lot. We'll put it in the parking lot for now, and maybe someone will address it in a bit later. We're going to go to full screen so we can see each other and kind of have a conversation. We want this to be conversational. And so there's another question that has risen in the chat, and I'll jump to it. And again, it's from Mr. Bishop Hincherman. I'm going to make sure I state your name correctly. How do our other residential property taxes compare to other states, both with the rate and the homestead exemption? A fellow commissioner wanted to suggest looking at raising residential property taxes and maybe balancing it with an increase in homestead exemptions. And so I know that's a big issue. It's one that I even take to heart because I am a resident of DC. I've never introduced myself, Ray Crawford, DC resident facilitator. But that's one that I have an increasing value proposition for. Yeshua, I'm looking at you again. I don't know if you want to tackle that for us, but it'd be great.
I can take that question. There are some significant differences between how DC taxes residential property and how our neighbors tax residential property. First, the district definitely has the lowest rate on residential property. It's 85 cents on the dollar, but when you incorporate homestead deduction, which is a common feature in many other jurisdictions around us as well, our effective tax rates go to about 74%. We also have this feature that the growth in your tax bill cannot be more than 10% every year. So what happens is when housing values are increasing rapidly, our tax bills do not grow that much. But for example, during the Great Recession, we saw values decline, but most folks ended up paying even more because they were catching up with like the previous growth that they weren't taxed for. So that's very different from the surrounding jurisdictions. Surrounding jurisdictions typically range anywhere from $1 to $1.10 on $100 of assessed value. But a really different thing about DC is we do not have a calculated rate. Our property taxes do not change based on the spending needs. For example, in Arlington, and again, that's largely because we have a large portfolio, we're a state, a locality, and all of those things. So we have a large portfolio of taxes. So in Arlington, they only have property taxes and they collect, let's say, fines and fees and trash collection money. And the county board decides how much to spend, and they will recalculate your taxes every year just to get that amount. So that's very different in DC. So we have more stability in our tax rates, and they're also lower.
Thank you. It's so great to have an expert tax person on the line where we're going through these questions.
Can I just add, Ray, that another
yes. Erica,
thing to know, yes, another thing folks should know about our property taxes is that we actually rely much more on commercial property taxes in the district than we do residential, even though we have far more residential property than we do commercial property. So just a thing to keep in mind, especially right now as we're seeing commercial property taxes, tax collections decline because of declining commercial property values. That part of the reason it's having such a big impact is because we're a little more heavily reliant on commercial property taxes than residential.
That's absolutely right. I'm so glad you brought this up. There are 917 large commercial office buildings in DC. That's like 1% of all the property we tax. They actually account for 25% of all value in property, and they account for 39% of the taxes collected. That's because we tax commercial property at a much higher rate compared to the residential, and no other jurisdiction around us does that. Thank you, Erica, for bringing that up.
That's also why currently declining values in commercial real estate is such a big problem for the DC budget.
Well, one thing, we have a couple of questions in the chat we want to get to, but I have a follow-on of my own with this. And how do we tax, or how do we manage the amount of property within the district that is utilized by the federal government or General Services Administration? Is there a tax, or is that all monies that are received through the federal payment? If anyone can answer.
That's one of our challenges, that the federal government does not pay property tax. And so you know, it adds to the sort of degree of difficulty of doing tax revision that we've got it. I don't remember the exact figure. Yes, probably knows off the top of her head, or Erica, what 25% or something of the property in DC is essentially tax-free because it's federal government, or because the federal government has given tax breaks to nonprofits. I mean, I'd be interested in participants reflecting here, and I'd be interested in other in you all having conversations in your communities about the residential property tax. It is one of the, you know, it is one of the things about living here that we have low rates and a very large homestead deduction for homeowners. How does that feel to folks in the community going forward?
Two quick things I want to get to in the chat. One is a response to Becky's question earlier, a couple of responses. And I think that the overwhelming response that I'm reading is that residents are particularly fond of the cameras, or the residents that are represented by our ANC members are particularly fond of them. However, they don't know where the money's going. And so I think that that's a bigger question. The general fund kind of is a succubus of sorts for the monies. And so I think that citizens would probably like to have a better understanding of how those monies are being utilized for the city. I think there was an excellent presentation that Nick gave of the justification of where revenue is going, but that certain pot of money, I think, could be better explained based on kind of the questions that I see in the chat. Hope that I captured that correctly. There's one from Ms. Crocker, and I'll speak to what she stated, and then there's another one from Ms. Edwards that I'll get to as well. In an earlier slide, we brought up the discussion on the wealth tax, and the question is, what was the nature of that discussion, or how was wealth, or how is currently wealth being defined in the tax system? And I don't know if there's an answer to that, or if it's something we should take back for consideration.
Yeah, I'm pausing on how to answer that because it's a really important question, and it's a big one. I would say our presentation focused at a fairly high level around the challenge, the reality of the extremely high concentrations of wealth in a very few hands that we have. But I think the how-to is honestly a question that is bedeviling, and a lot of people are thinking hard about what might be a good way to do it. And there's two, you know, conceptually, there's a couple of ways to think about it. One is to essentially come up with some measurement of wealth. So for instance, you might have a measurement of total financial wealth, all of the, you know, all of the stock and other kinds of financial assets that folks hold. You know, it's been proposed at the federal level. Typically, these proposals have a very high threshold. You have to have often tens of millions of dollars in financial wealth for it to actually zero it all. And the other way to think about it is thinking harder about how the income that flows from wealth. So for instance, capital gains, coming up with better ways, because a lot of one of the reasons that wealth has accumulated in the hands of a fairly small number of people is that people can accrue it relatively at relatively low rates, or sometimes tax-free entirely. So so thinking hard about how to cut off some of the tax breaks that essentially relate to the way income flows out of wealth. It's a pretty high level conversation, and I'd be really interested in sort of if where you're coming from in that question. If you're like, yeah, it sounds like a great idea, we should be pursuing it, or if you're coming from more of a, ooh, that makes me really nervous, and I think I should run away from that idea. So feel free to throw a comment in the chat or weigh in via the website.
Yeah, I think following up on the website, as well as one thing that the TRC may take into consideration, there are several backgrounders on the website which talk about aspects of taxes, and potentially one could be developed regarding the nature of the definition of wealth, just as a possible entree into something that could be good for the public. One secondary question from Ms. Edwards this evening is, how will the new cannabis businesses be taxed? And this may be a question that's broader on how are new businesses taxed, or is there a certain specific mechanism that be used for the new cannabis businesses, which are new into the marketplace? So I'm unsure if there's an answer to that, or if that's something, and thank you, Becky, for dropping the backgrounders into the chat. If there's something that that can be spoken to or something we should take back for consideration?
I can respond to that. That's another preemption on the District of Columbia. The district decriminalized marijuana sales and then actually passed legislation to be able to tax marijuana sales, but that has been overturned by the federal government. So at present, the only tax we have is on medical marijuana. It's, I believe, at 6%. And we have recently passed legislation in the city allowing people to self-certify, which is sort of like anyone can buy, but we can't charge a tax rate that's different from the medical. So everyone is buying because they have certified themselves as medically dependent or in need of marijuana. So we are taxing it at 6%.
Thank you for that clarification, Yashin.
And again, just not to be the dead horse, but I'd be interested in folks, if folks think that's the right rate, should we be taxing a little higher? Should we be not taxing it at all?
Yeah, Nick brings up a great ideation. I don't know if that's a word, but I've created it this evening. And that's to generate questions from the ideas that are posed in the chat and in the discussion. So if you have other questions that your questions bring about, if that could prompt an idea that you would like to put forward, the TRC is open to acceptance of those ideas, those recommendations, those thoughts for review through this process. And so please do not hesitate to put any ideas, any questions. This is your meeting and it's for your benefit and for the communities that you represent. So thank you so much for your engagement thus far.
Ray, do you mind if I jump in on the traffic camera
Oh, yes, ma'am.
comments? Because I see some comments in there about the revenue that was going to Vision Zero investments specifically now being directed to the general fund. That's true. I think another thing, and it, you know, the response of the mayor's team about that and whether it will undercut traffic safety investments is that most traffic safety investments are capital investments, sort of like infrastructure investments. And so putting it in the general fund is going to help us make some of those investments. You can take that how you want to. I think the other thing to note, though, about something like revenue from traffic cameras or anything that's designed to reduce a certain type of behavior is that if it works, then over time it should collect less revenue. And so the sort of balancing the budget on a revenue source like that can be tricky and cause some problems in the future if it's effective at actually reducing the behavior, reducing speeding, because you would then be collecting less money in speeding tickets.
Thank you for that, Erica. That's great information. And I think that that's good information for our ANC commissioners to have, specifically as you spoke to the piece that over time, the perspective would be that the funds from that traffic camera should lessen as people comply with the rules that are engaged based on the traffic camera, as well as the infrastructure aspect of your answer as well, I think was very good. So thank you for that information. Any other questions from folks? We have some time left and we would really like to get as many questions and thoughts and ideas from you as possible while we're here this evening.
I have another question for ANC commissioners. So we had a meeting yesterday with representatives from the small business community, and we heard examples of small businesses where there was a mistake in the OTR's computer system, and they were told they had fines or were not in compliance when they had no fines, they were in compliance, and then they got in a lot of trouble and had to pay lawyers to fix it for them. And I'm wondering if you guys have seen similar instances where that's happened, where the DC government or the OTR has made a big mistake, but then the onus is on an individual resident or a small business owner to fix it at their own expense. It just sounds horrifying. what we heard yesterday, but maybe those are isolated cases. Let's
Yeah,
see,
someone speaks to
Joseph.
this, yeah, with seen it with DCRA and others comments about OTR's system is very bad. I've seen several mistakes and instances where businesses have been penalized.
And Paula, do you think we could connect with you later to learn more about the specifics of what went wrong there?
Mhm.
The systems don't talk to each other. Like what? Go ahead, Yeshim.
So I don't mean to call on anyone, but we have some ANC commissioners here who haven't had the chance to chime in. I can see Janelle, I can see Mimsy and Carla. I would love to be able to hear from all of you. So if you have any comments. And Karen.
I'll throw out a general question. This is Gregory McCarthy, one of the commissioners. It's a rather crude, overarching question, but I'd be interested in some feedback. In a perfect world, we'd love to lower income taxes. We'd love to lower business taxes. We'd love to lower property taxes. But that's not the world we're in. And I'm wondering if your constituents, from what you can tell, whether they feel those three legs of that stool are kind of balanced. Do people generally think that our income taxes are too high, or the other two taxes are too low, or is the blend of them kind of just right? Or what's the feel that you get in your communities as where the most work and reform is needed?
So there's a comment that people complain about them all, Gregory. So it's the gambit. They run the gambit. But a second one by Mr. Rubenstein I'll speak to. I think your question about inaccuracies in the OTR system speaks to a larger point of regulatory burden on small businesses. So that really should be considered together with a tax burden to get a full picture. So I guess the entirety of the burden on small businesses, I understand that somewhat from supporting Main Streets in my neighborhood and the issues that some of our small businesses have just through survival, most specifically that were exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic and coming out of that. Another one from Gerald is apparently there's a distinction between tax policy, economic policy, not a criticism. Economists would be more concerned with a cost benefit analysis, is the comment from Gerald. And Janelle, regarding the clean hands search, she agrees with Joe on how businesses think that this is a ridiculous process at this point, or how it has turned into that, specifically for nonprofits and small businesses. So some commentary to, again, administrative burden that's associated with small businesses have to do that is related to the tax system, but not solely and completely an aspect of that. The burden of tax and other compliance is more of a problem than the taxes themselves. So potentially sessions like this, where there's a learning aspect to what is happening with the taxes, and as well as an avenue to speak to how those learning can change into improvements or ways that people can be educated on how to engage with the tax system may be beneficial to the citizenry that our ANCs support. And so with that, maybe we can flip back to your page, Nicholas, that gives a couple other highlights. Becky, I know you have a comment.
Yeah, can I? Yeah, I saw Gerald's note, and I would love to hear from Gerald. So then, how would this conversation be different if we were talking about cost benefit analysis, or what sort of, like in your mind, what would a cost benefit analysis mean for DC tax policy? What would you change or improve?
Well, thank you. I think the difference is that you would be asking questions about where could the investment be that would produce the greatest result, more than how many taxes can we collect and how do we spread it around. It would also look at unintended consequences. such as our investment in sports betting and marijuana, which likely is going to cost money and perhaps more than it's going to make. But that would at least be a discussion to be considered rather than simply totaling up the dollars in and the dollars out. That was the intent of my question.
Thank you.
Can I just mention something very quickly? Thank you so much. I think that as an economist, I wasn't offended, so I'll start with that. There is an institutional constraint in the District of Columbia as well. Any legislative proposal, whether it's a tax increase or a spending thing, has to get a score from the CFO's office. And I worked there 10 years doing exactly this work, scoring legislation. And the CFO's office will not recognize the dynamic impacts. For example, if you invest in healthcare, our future Medicare expenditures can go down. They would not score it because it's too uncertain. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is the revenue estimates serve one purpose, is to be the basis for spending decisions. And it's not useful to have a range of estimates or sort of like secondary impacts incorporated, because it makes things difficult. So that institutional constraint sometimes prevents us from thinking about the returns to various investments or the returns to various policies.
Thank you for that, Yesham. I am looking in the chat. I don't see any new questions here. I do want to give another round robin to see if there's any other thoughts that some of our folks who have not had the opportunity to speak. Mimsy, I know that you added a comment in the chat. I didn't want to disregard it, stating that around the questions about small businesses, I think this was directed to something that is very difficult to get permitting complete. And then they are trying to pay rent while waiting to start a business. So there's a lack of revenue that is coming into the business while they're trying to get the business started, which can be detrimental to even getting going. I think that that's the gist of your question or your statement, which is again in alignment with administrative burden that's associated with the tax system. So another question, and Edward has a new question. Main concerns he hears regarding the burden on seniors and concerns the way real property assessed value is determined is opaque. In the process of incentivizing or fighting it, you're losing out. I think many are in favor of paying for better services from DC and will be open to fair and equitable increases if it is clear what they are paying for. So I don't know if that's something we can take into account in that way, or if there's someone that wants to address it. I too think that understanding how the tax assessments are growing simply because housing is increasing based on sales or revenue sales, and then you see that, but you can't access that value, which is very difficult, but it becomes higher in taxes. How is that something that the Tax Revenue Commission may look at or provide some recommendation to the council for?
I think it's helpful to hear that comment. Thank you, Edward. And I think any more sort of details you have in your experience with the property tax assessment process, it is a little mysterious. And if you think about that, one of the unique things about a property tax is it is the only tax that is levied on a transaction that isn't actually happening, right? It's essentially levied on an idea what your house is house is quote unquote worth, even if it's not being actually bought or sold in that time. So I think it's an issue. And on the racial equity front, one of the things we heard in the presentation was that there are real disparities. There's increasing research that is suggesting that they're around the country, not specifically in DC, but there is some interesting emerging research that speaks to the inequities sometimes of the assessment process. And we need to look at that. And at the same time, the assessor's office has done a lot of investing in trying to use the most sophisticated possible software to try to get at this, again, this opaque question of sort of what is your house worth. It's a tricky one. But thanks for lifting up that concern.
Mike, I saw you come online. Did you have a question that you wanted to offer to? And then Gregory, we will get right back to you. I just saw Mike jump on if he wanted to respond, and we'll come to you.
I just wanted since we're talking about property tax assessments, I thought this might be a good group to ask this question regarding if they have seen any problems with the vacant invited property tax assessment process, and if they have any recommendations on how to improve that.
I just wanted to commend Commissioner Paula Edwards on her extremely succinct and compelling summary there. The burden of tax and other compliance is more of a problem than the taxes themselves. So that's a very motivational thing for me, at least, to take away from this. And it's inspiration, I think, to say, I think some people said it today, people don't mind paying taxes, but if it's difficult or expensive to pay them, it makes everything twice as bad. And I think the commission ought to devote some effort into addressing that thing such that the burden of tax and other compliance is not an expense and a burden. So thank you, Commissioner Edwards, for that. And we'll take some inspiration from that.
Thank you for that comment, Gregory. One other question that came from Mr. Rubenstein, and then I'll get to two other questions two other comments, and then we'll roll into a couple of items that we want to offer to you and a request that we'll have for those who are attending today as well, is how the tax system may encourage or hinder growth in senior housing. I think it's something that the Tax Revenue Commission can think about, because as we have a growing senior population, how will they continue to be housed? And I guess an economy that is not necessarily having affordability for that specific age cohort. So something that the Revision Commission may think about. Secondarily, people get caught by surprise that the homestead exemption isn't automatic and part of closing process. So not sure if there can be, again, additional information or education around the utilization of resources within the tax system. Something, again, that potentially the Tax Revenue Commission can think about from a marketing or a community engagement standpoint. Yeah, it's another question. I heard a comment from someone.
Nick was laughing.
So Nick, if we go to that final slide that you had, we want to put a request out to all those who are participating today. I apologize. There's a car that's taxing my nerves going off in the distance. So I hope that you guys don't hear that, or it's not necessarily with you. One quick thing is we need your help. So we want to continue to engage the community. We know that ANC commissioners have a link into the people that they serve, that you meet with them early and often, and you talk about everything from what's going on in the alleyways to curb cuts to taxes. And so we would really like to see, as we put together additional opportunities for the community at large to engage with the Tax Revision Commission, we would love your support in helping us market those opportunities to citizens so that they have the chance to give feedback and information to us as well. Second to that, and so we have a couple things. We go back one slide for us, Nick. Yes, on May 1st, there'll be a public listening session and it will be in person. Nick, would you like to speak to that very quickly?
Sure. It's at the ARC, the Town Hall Education Recreation Arts Center over in Ward 8. It is our first in-person public listening session, and hopefully not our last, but it is the one that is scheduled at this point. So folks are welcome to come to that. And perhaps you can share this with your constituents, and then May 4th, of course, is a virtual session, maybe a little similar to this one, but again, open to the general public looking for a range of inputs there.
Yeah, and we plan to also hold at least one other public listening session in June and a final input session in the fall. And so when we would love for you to help us market the May 1st public listening session that's in person at the ARC, as well as the public listening session that will be held virtually. And if you have ideas that you would like to offer to this group on how we can engage the public in more unique and original ways to get their input, recommendations, great ideas, and critiques that the Tax Revision Commission can take into account, it would be deeply and greatly appreciated. And so we'll go to the next slide. So for additional information, the next steps, you can visit the DC Tax Revision Commission.org, and you can put your phone up to the QR code to access that information. There will also, there are backgrounders as Becky dropped into the chat, as well as links to other materials. You can sign up for notices about our future events, as well as other materials that will be available. You can access this presentation because it is recorded, and it'll be there for your listening pleasure or to share with others. And you can also, most importantly, share the ideas that you have, the feedback, the thoughts from your citizenry, and direct people there to share their ideas as well.
I just want to say one other thing, Ray, is that, it's DC, I know has we have a lot of public meetings, a lot of opportunities for citizen input on various things, including things like the budget. To my knowledge, in our research, we did not find a lot of examples of DC or honestly any other jurisdiction putting a lot of effort into collecting citizen input around tax policy. So I'm grateful to everybody here, not only for your general service as ANC commissioner, but for being a little bit of a part of an experiment here and how to engage folks around tax policy issues. And we're really looking forward to doing more of it and figuring out how to do more and better. So really be interested in your all's ongoing feedback as well as participation.
Yeah, just to underscore Nick's point, if you have any thoughts on even the presentation this evening, whether aspects of it that were great, whether aspects of it that you would like to see differently, are there pieces of it that you would like to present to people that you would like us to can and just send out or create a backgrounder around? Again, those ideas are what's necessary for us to continue this type of engagement with the community, because the most important aspect for the Tax Revision Commission is to ensure that the people and the citizens of Washington, D.C. are able to give feedback to their tax system that makes their communities safe, educates the children, creates infrastructure, and does not have long-term administrative burden that was part of our conversation this evening. We appreciate your engagement. And with that, we'll go to our last slide.
That's it. Well, I guess we have one more. Just a thank you slide.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for attending the Tax Revision Commission discussion this evening. Again, whatever feedback you have or thoughts on how we can continue to get your feedback and recommendations will be greatly appreciated. And we sincerely appreciate your time on this Thursday evening. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.